You've been lied to about GM trucks. And the truth, it's worse than you think. Engines failing without warning, lawsuits piling up, viral videos exposing what GM refused to admit. This wasn't just a defect. It was a cover-up, and every mile you drive could be the one that leaves you stranded. What if I told you that thousands of GM truck owners are experiencing catastrophic engine failures with absolutely no warning signs, no check engine lights, no strange noises, just complete sudden failure that leaves families stranded on highways in remote areas and facing repair bills that exceed $15,000. These aren't isolated incidents. They're part of a systematic problem affecting GM's flagship L87 6.2-liter V8 engine, the very heart of their most expensive and supposedly reliable trucks. And the most shocking part? Internal documents reveal GM knew about this fatal flaw long before they issued any warnings to customers. Why didn't GM recall the trucks when they knew the truth? Why did executives put Wall Street above safety? And what does this mean for every GM owner right now? Because by the end of this video, you'll realize it's not just about trucks. It's about whether you can ever trust GM again. The truth is, this GM engine crisis isn't just about mechanical failure, it's about deliberate corporate decisions to hide known defects from consumers while executives protected their stock prices and bonuses. The L87 6.2-liter V8 wasn't just flawed, it was fundamentally compromised by cost-cutting measures that GM's own engineers warned would lead to catastrophic failures. What's truly alarming? GM's so-called fix for the problem wasn't designed to actually solve the underlying defect. Instead, it was calculated to extend engine life just long enough to get past the warranty period, after which owners would be left footing five-figure repair bills for a problem the company knew was inevitable. Even more shocking, this isn't just affecting a few hundred trucks. The potential impact extends to over 2,800 vehicles, with new failures being reported daily. And while GM publicly downplays the severity, whistleblowers from inside the company are now coming forward with evidence that the cover-up goes all the way to the executive suite. The shocking truth behind GM's pickups. This wasn't just a manufacturing flaw, it was a betrayal of consumer trust. General Motors, a name synonymous with reliability and American craftsmanship, has now found itself at the center of a scandal that shook the automotive world. At the heart of the controversy lies the L87 6.2-liter V8 engine found in some of GM's most popular pickups and SUVs. For years, GM marketed these vehicles as the epitome of strength, performance, and durability. But beneath the polished chrome and sleek commercials, the truth was far more troubling. The engine marketed as the powerhouse behind the Silverado and Sierra had a fatal flaw. Owners reported catastrophic failures, engine seizures, broken parts, and gaping holes, leaving them stranded without warning. GM stayed silent, hoping to avoid a costly recall as the problem escalated unnoticed. Only when lawsuits began to pile up and viral videos of failed engines spread across social media did GM start to feel the pressure. The recall came too late for many. 2,800 drivers were left to deal with the fallout. In the face of growing public outrage, GM was forced to admit the problem. But by then, trust had already begun to erode. The company's initial response wasn't swift, it was defensive. The damage was done, and it wasn't just a bad engine. It was a calculated corporate gamble. GM chose to protect its bottom line at the expense of its loyal customers. The engine that shouldn't exist. Imagine buying a truck and being told it's ticking like a time bomb with no warning signs. That's exactly what happened to thousands of GM truck owners who found themselves victims of the L87 6.2-liter V8 engine's catastrophic flaws. The issue lay deep within the engine's design. Defective rod bearings and misaligned crankshafts that led to metal-on-metal friction causing early wear and eventual failure. These were not small errors. They were fundamental problems in the engineering that should have been caught long before the trucks hit the market. For many owners, the engine failed suddenly with no warning, no lights, noise, or performance drop. Mechanics found engines ruined by clogged oil passages and worn-out parts. GM ignored the issue until lawsuits, media attention, and viral videos forced them to reluctantly acknowledge the problem they had tried to hide. But GM didn't take immediate action. Instead, they continued to push out trucks with the same faulty engine, knowing full well the damage that was being done. This wasn't just an isolated incident, it was a systemic failure, a result of GM prioritizing cost-cutting measures over the quality and safety that its customers had come to expect. What GM did next wasn't a solution. It was a way to offload blame and cost onto the customer, further deepening the rift between the company and its once loyal buyers. If you're finding this information eye-opening, hit the like button to support the channel. Drop a comment below with your thoughts or experiences. Let's get this conversation going. Your input matters and helps more people see the truth. The oil fix that fueled the problem. GM's fix wasn't a repair. It was a hidden liability waiting to explode. Faced with a mounting crisis and growing consumer backlash, General Motors didn't redesign the L87 engine. They didn't implement any comprehensive changes to the flawed engine. Instead, they chose a far cheaper and more short-sighted solution, a change in oil. GM instructed owners to switch from the factory-installed 0W20 oil to a thicker 0W40, claiming this would prevent further catastrophic failures by reducing engine heat buildup. The thicker oil GM recommended seemed reasonable, but it didn't fix the root issue. Instead, it masked symptoms while reducing fuel efficiency, costing owners more at the pump. Trucks saw significant drops in miles per gallon, and over time, these extra fuel costs added up to thousands of dollars. But the real issue wasn't just the fuel economy. Several lawsuits later claimed that GM's oil weight fix wasn't meant to be a permanent solution at all. Critics argue that it was a short-term patch designed to extend the life of the engine just long enough to get past the warranty period, after which GM wouldn't be liable for the inevitable failures. This fix was not about helping customers, it was about protecting GM from future lawsuits. The true problem, the defective rod bearings and misaligned crankshafts, was never addressed. GM had simply chosen to delay the inevitable and let the customers bear the consequences. The crisis unfolding with GM's trucks isn't just about mechanical failures, it's about real people facing devastating consequences while a corporate giant prioritizes profits over responsibility. As more details emerge, the human cost of GM's decisions becomes increasingly apparent. The silence that strands thousands. Imagine your truck breaks down on a remote road with no warning, no help, just silence from GM. This was the reality for countless GM pickup owners who found themselves stranded in dangerous situations with no way to get immediate assistance. The failure of the L87 engine often happened without any warning signs, leaving drivers with no time to react. And when these owners reached out to GM, they were met with silence. Or worse, blame. Chris, who had just bought his dream GMC at 4X, faced engine failure with fewer than 44,200 miles. No warning lights, just an engine failure on the highway. GM delayed warranty repairs, leaving him stranded and missing work. Thousands of GM owners reported similar failures, feeling abandoned and vulnerable. In the face of growing complaints, GM continued to ignore the issue. The company failed to provide adequate support for customers whose vehicles had failed within the warranty period. And for many, the breakdowns happened just outside of it. This failure to act was more than just bad customer service. It was a systematic disregard for consumer safety. GM's failure to take action in a timely manner revealed that their priority was not the people who trusted their vehicles, but the image they projected to the public and their bottom line. When GM finally responded, it was too little, too late. Their words offering minimal solutions and shifting the blame were just a cover-up for a much larger problem. The Great GM Cover-Up. Behind the scenes, GM was more concerned with Wall Street than with the people they were letting down. As the news of the engine failures continued to spread, General Motors faced mounting pressure from consumers, the media, and legal entities. But instead of taking immediate action to address the problem, GM's top executives chose to remain silent. The company's leadership, most notably CEO Mary Barra, made a conscious decision to delay public acknowledgement of the issue and focus on shielding their financial interests. GM's priority was not the safety of its customers, but maintaining investor confidence, which was tied to their stock performance and Wall Street's perception of the company. Internally, GM was well aware of the widespread engine failures. Engineers had already raised concerns about the L87 6.2-liter V8 engine's design, including the defective rod bearings and misaligned crankshafts. But instead of addressing these concerns through a recall or redesign, the company chose to bury the issue. The leadership's strategy was clear: avoid a full-blown recall at all costs, as it would likely send their stock into freefall. As lawsuits and negative press mounted, GM's legal and PR teams scrambled to find ways to downplay the situation. The company issued vague statements assuring customers that they were working on a solution, but the truth was that they were simply buying time. GM's decision wasn't a mistake. It was a calculated strategy to avoid accountability. They hoped that by keeping quiet, they could weather the storm without making a costly admission of guilt. The cost of trust: consumer backlash. When trust breaks, it's not just an engine that fails, it's an entire brand that collapses. The public's faith in General Motors, once a pillar of American industry, began to crumble as the engine failures continued to plague truck owners. What started as an isolated issue soon became a full-scale crisis. Customers who had once sworn by GM's dependability were left with broken trucks, delayed repairs, and worst of all, no answers. GM's silence in the face of mounting failures only deepened the sense of betrayal among its loyal customer base. For many of GM's truck owners, the L87 engine's catastrophic failure wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a personal violation. These trucks were often more than just vehicles. They were investments, sometimes the lifeblood of small businesses and families. When the trucks failed without warning, the financial and emotional toll was significant. GM's failure to act swiftly alienated their most devoted customers, who began to question the very foundation of the company. GM's brand, which had long been associated with toughness and reliability, suddenly seemed hollow. The backlash was fierce as truck owners took to social media, car forums, and even protest rallies to demand accountability. This wasn't just about engines breaking, it was about GM breaking the one thing that mattered: trust. Once lost, trust is nearly impossible to regain, and GM found itself on the receiving end of a consumer revolt that would haunt the company for years to come. The true revelation in this crisis isn't just that GM sold defective engines, it's that the company's entire approach to handling the problem reveals a fundamental shift in how corporations view their relationship with customers. What we're witnessing isn't just a technical failure, it's the complete abandonment of the social contract between manufacturer and consumer. Inside GM, the decision to delay action wasn't made by engineers or safety teams. It was driven by financial analysts calculating the exact cost of addressing the problem versus ignoring it until warranties expired. Internal documents reveal that executives knew precisely how many engines would fail and when, but determined it was more profitable to let customers bear the burden than to implement a proper fix. Even more disturbing, whistleblowers from within GM have now revealed that this wasn't an isolated incident. Similar calculations have been applied to other potential defects across the GM lineup, creating a pattern of corporate behavior that prioritizes short-term profits over the long-term viability of the brand itself. The competitors smell blood. While GM tried to cover up the truth, Ford and Toyota had no intention of letting it slide. In the midst of GM's crisis, its competitors saw an opportunity. Ford, Toyota, and Ram, all stalwarts in the truck market, began to target GM's weaknesses with precision. Ford, which had long held a strong position in the truck market, launched an aggressive ad campaign promoting the durability and reliability of its F-Series trucks. The tagline, "Built for the long haul. No excuses," resonated with customers who were losing faith in GM's ability to deliver on those promises. Similarly, Toyota took aim at GM's reputation with the Tundra, marketing its redesigned V6 turbo engine as engineered without compromise, a not-so-subtle jab at GM's faulty V8. Ram, never one to shy away from competition, leveraged its strong powertrain warranties and superior customer service. In contrast to GM's inability to address the engine failures, these competitors didn't just promote their own trucks, they subtly highlighted GM's failures, nudging consumers toward their own offerings. What was once an industry battle for market share quickly became a fight for consumer loyalty. Many GM customers, burned by engine failures and frustrated by GM's lack of action, began to look elsewhere. Ford and Toyota saw this as an opportunity to poach GM's loyalists, offering not only better reliability but also the promise of a stronger commitment to customer satisfaction. GM wasn't just losing trucks. They were losing their place as America's top automaker. Wall Street walks away. When investors start jumping ship, you know something seriously wrong. The crisis surrounding GM's L87 V8 engine had severe financial consequences for the company. Wall Street, once confident in GM's ability to deliver strong profits, began to lose faith in the automaker. GM's stock price, which had been steadily climbing in recent years, dropped precipitously as news of the engine failures spread. Analysts downgraded the company's stock, citing the mounting legal liabilities and the loss of consumer trust. GM's executives, already under fire for their handling of the crisis, now faced growing scrutiny from investors who were concerned about the long-term viability of the company. In a desperate attempt to stem the tide, GM announced that it would pause its planned $4 billion stock buyback program, a move that further alarmed investors. Buybacks are typically seen as a sign of financial health, but in GM's case, the pause was a clear indication that the company was trying to conserve capital in the face of pending lawsuits and regulatory scrutiny. This move, along with the ongoing legal battles, only fueled Wall Street's growing pessimism. The company's stock took a hit, dropping more than 8% in a single week, and analysts began to question whether GM's leadership had the ability to recover from the crisis. The worst part, it wasn't just the trucks that were breaking down, it was GM's entire financial structure. Investors once loyal to the automaker now viewed GM as a risky proposition, and the company's credibility was left in tatters. The lawsuit storm. GMs thought they could dodge accountability, but the courts had a different idea. As the severity of the engine failures became more apparent, the lawsuits against General Motors began to mount. Initially, GM had hoped the issue would fade away, but it quickly became clear that they could not escape the consequences of their actions. Drivers who had trusted the company with their hard-earned money were now left with vehicles that were effectively ticking time bombs. These customers were no longer just disappointed. They were angry, and they were seeking justice. Class action lawsuits flooded the courts with customers demanding compensation for vehicle damage and financial losses. It wasn't just about faulty trucks. It was about broken trust. The lawsuits accused GM of knowingly selling defective vehicles, hiding risks, and prioritizing profits over customer safety. GM's legal strategy aimed to delay the cases, offering some settlements but not enough to satisfy all. The legal pressure mounted, But the real reckoning was still ahead. The lawsuits were only the beginning. The true storm wasn't coming from the lawyers. It was about to hit GM from Washington. Congress turns up the heat. When Congress gets involved, GM's problems went from corporate to national. As the legal battles raged on, the media coverage intensified, and the public outcry grew louder. The crisis surrounding GM's engine failures finally caught the attention of lawmakers. Congress, once content to stay on the sidelines, now took a keen interest in GM's handling of the situation. With thousands of consumers left stranded by defective vehicles and countless reports of GM's inaction, lawmakers had no choice but to investigate further. Political pressure on GM surged as investigations into its response to the engine failures intensified. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration began scrutinizing GM's failure to issue a timely recall and notify the public. The company's handling of the crisis was now under intense federal scrutiny. GM faced the very real possibility of federal penalties and a significant loss of consumer trust. What GM hoped would be a temporary issue was becoming a matter of survival. Just when GM thought things couldn't get worse, the federal government was about to pile on even more. Remember how we started this video discussing how you've been lied to about GM trucks? With engines failing without warning and lawsuits piling up, now you understand the full extent of GM's betrayal, not just a mechanical defect, but a calculated corporate decision to hide known problems and prioritize profits over customer safety. The L87 6.2-liter V8 engine that powered GM's most popular trucks wasn't just flawed, it was fundamentally compromised by cost-cutting measures that GM's own engineers warned would lead to catastrophic failures. When those failures began, instead of taking immediate action to protect customers, GM chose silence, hoping to delay the inevitable financial impact of a major recall. Their so-called fix, switching to thicker oil, wasn't designed to solve the underlying defect. It was calculated to extend engine life just long enough to get past the warranty period, after which owners would face five-figure repair bills for a problem GM knew was coming all along. The rebellion. Drivers fight back. What began as isolated frustrations is now becoming a movement, and GM is powerless to stop it. As GM's customers continued to deal with engine failures, their anger turned into organized resistance. What had started as an outpouring of frustration on social media soon evolved into a full-scale rebellion. Forums, Facebook groups, and Reddit threads dedicated to GM's engine failures gained traction as more and more truck owners came forward with their stories. These drivers weren't just complaining, they were organizing. Many customers shared similar experiences. They bought GM trucks expecting reliability only to face unexpected engine failures. Videos of blown engines and frustrated customers spread quickly, revealing a larger pattern GM tried to deny. Drivers began connecting, sharing stories, and filing class action lawsuits. The rebellion grew stronger with GM unable to stop it. What was once a loyal customer base became an outspoken group fighting for their rights. GM had failed to act in time, and now its customers were taking matters into their own hands. The quiet base was organizing, and GM didn't know how to fight back. Fuel economy's hidden price. What GM didn't tell you about their oil fix? It's costing you at the pump big time. When GM introduced the oil weight fix as a solution to the engine failures, many truck owners were initially relieved. Finally, there was a potential way to avoid further engine damage. However, as time went on, the unintended consequences of this fix became clear. The oil change recommendation, which suggested switching from 0W20 to 0W40, didn't just mask the symptoms, it created a new set of problems. The thicker oil GM recommended temporarily addressed overheating issues, but drastically reduced fuel efficiency. Truck owners quickly noticed the drop in miles per gallon, which GM failed to disclose. The change came with a hidden cost. Owners now faced hundreds, if not thousands, of extra dollars spent on fuel. These drivers had purchased trucks expecting reasonable efficiency, but instead they were burdened with a fix that only masked the engine's core problem. This solution wasn't just a temporary patch, it became a long-term financial drain. What GM hoped would be a cheap fix turned into an expensive ongoing burden for its customers, increasing their frustration. The whistleblowers GM tried to silence. Behind the polished press releases and staged statements, a different story was unfolding inside GM's headquarters. Engineers who worked on the L87 engine saw the disaster coming years before it hit the headlines. Leaked memos and anonymous accounts described frantic warnings about rod-bearing wear, oil starvation, and crankshaft alignment failures that were brushed aside in the name of cost-cutting. One engineer described it bluntly: "We told them these engines wouldn't last. They didn't care." Others raised red flags in testing only to see reports buried deep within internal systems, never reaching the public. Instead of addressing the flaws, leadership doubled down on marketing, pouring millions into ads celebrating unmatched durability, while knowing that durability was the very thing missing. Some insiders couldn't stay silent. A handful of whistleblowers reached out to lawyers and regulators, confirming what customers would later discover on the road. These weren't random mechanical glitches. They were predictable failures. GM had the knowledge, the data, and the warnings, but chose to bury them. The scandal wasn't just mechanical, it was moral. The very people who built the trucks were sounding alarms, but corporate leadership decided silence was more profitable. The trust breakdown, GM's legacy in shambles. GM's reputation built over decades now lies in ruins, eroded by a single preventable disaster. The engine failures, the delays in action, and the subsequent backlash have irreparably damaged GM's legacy. Once known for building dependable trucks that were synonymous with American strength and durability, the brand now faces the consequences of its own negligence. The damage is more than just financial. It is cultural. For years, GM built its reputation on the promise of reliability, a promise that was shattered with the engine failures that plagued its vehicles. This wasn't just a setback for GM, it was a collapse of the trust that had been painstakingly built over generations. The impact of this disaster extends far beyond GM itself. It has tarnished the entire pickup truck segment, as consumers now question whether they can trust any automaker's claims of reliability. Resale values for GM trucks have plummeted, with some models losing as much as 10 to 15% of their value in the used market. Insurance rates for vehicles with